If you've ever put out a bird feeder, maybe one full of sunflower seeds, you're actually part of this massive interaction between people and wildlife.
It's one of the biggest, really. I mean, we're talking about a scale that's pretty monumental.
How big are we talking?
Well, there was a study back in 2011. It found that 52.8 million Americans, just over the age of 16, were feeding wild birds.
52 million. Wow.
And that year, just that 1 year, they spent over $5 billion.
$5 billion on seed, feeders, all that.
Yeah, the whole setup. And that's an enormous amount of resources that we're, pumping into these ecosystems every single year.
And for all that effort, all that money?
Yeah.
It seems like we haven't had a really solid scientific handle on what it's actually doing, specifically to the bird's internal physiological health.
Exactly. The understanding has been surprisingly thin. But that's what we're going to change today.
So for this deep dive, we're digging into a really comprehensive study that was done between 2011 and 2014 in central Illinois.
Right. And this research, it went way beyond just counting birds. It asked a much deeper question. What is the actual biological cost or the benefit when you make food constantly and predictably available?
Okay, so let's break down how they did it. To get a clear answer, you need a control group.
Of course. So they set up 3 forested sites with feeders that were kept full all the time, ad libitum, as they say.
Constantly available.
Exactly. And they compared those against 3 other similar forested sites that had no feeders at all. That was the control.
And they were looking at some pretty common birds, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. 11 common feeder-using species. Things you'd recognize, like the northern cardinal, the house finch, black-capped chickadees.
But the really crucial part of this whole thing you mentioned was how they defined health. It wasn't just about, looking at a bird and saying, looks healthy.
No, not at all. And that's so important. The health of a wild animal is, well, it's incredibly complex. No single thing can tell you the whole story.
What do you mean?
Well, a bird might be heavy, which sounds good. It has fat reserves. But it could also be running on stress hormones constantly. Or maybe it's lean, but its immune system is in fantastic shape.
Do you need a bigger picture?
Precisely. So the researchers used what they called a multi-metric approach. They looked at 5 different things: stress levels, immune function, fat stores, overall body condition, and even nutritional history.
Okay, that makes sense. You're building a whole biological profile. So they established a baseline in 2011, and then they brought in the feeders. What was the first thing they noticed?
The first, and maybe one of the most striking findings, was about stress. The reliable food source immediately lowered their physiological stress.
And they measured this with something called the heterophil-to-lymphocyte ratio.
That's the one, the HL ratio.
All right, that sounds a bit technical. Let's unpack that. What is that ratio telling us?
Think of it as a biological stress gauge, but for chronic, long-term stress. It's all about how a bird allocates its resources. So heterophils are like your first responder cells. They're for short-term defense, cheap and fast to make when you're stressed. Lymphocytes, on the other hand, they're for your long-term adaptive immunity. They're really powerful, but they are metabolically very expensive to maintain.
So if a bird is constantly stressed out, maybe it's always searching for food, never sure where the next meal is, it can't afford to invest in those expensive lymphocytes. It has to prioritize immediate survival.
You've got it perfectly. Its body shifts resources away from long-term maintenance. A high HL ratio means that alarm bell is always ringing.
And the study found a big difference between the 2 groups.
A huge difference. The birds at the feeder sites had an HL ratio of about 1.27.
And the birds at the control sites, the ones foraging naturally.
Theirs was way up at 1.67, so that's about a 30% lower chronic stress load for the birds that had the feeders.
So that predictability, just knowing the food will be there, lets them relax their biological budget. They can invest in themselves.
Exactly. They can invest that energy instead of spending it on constant vigilance.
And I'm guessing that freed up energy shows up somewhere else, right? Like in their physical condition.
It does, almost immediately. You see it reflected in their fat scores. The birds at the feeder sites had way more fat reserves. Their score was around 0.89 compared to just 0.25 at the control sites.
That's almost 4 times as much stored fat. I mean, you'd expect that in winter, maybe, when they're trying to survive the cold. But did it last all year?
It did, even in spring and summer. And that tells us something really important. The food wasn't just a survival tool for the winter. It was actively driving fat deposition all year round, creating this amazing buffer against anything the environment could throw at them.
Like a sudden cold snap or a bad foraging season.
Exactly.
So they're less stressed, they're fatter. Let's go deeper into their internal systems. If they're investing in long-term health, their immune system should be stronger, right?
Right. And that brings us to antioxidants. The researchers found that birds at the feeder sites had a significantly higher total antioxidant capacity, or TAC.
We hear about antioxidants for people all the time, but why are they so crucial for a bird?
They're basically the body's cleanup crew. Just the act of living, flying, foraging, it all creates metabolic waste, what we call oxidative stress. Antioxidants neutralize that. They're vital for things like fertility, growth, and crucially, a functioning immune system.
And the numbers showed a pretty big jump there, too.
Oh, yeah. The feeder sites had a TAC score of around 1477, while the control sites were down at 1240. That's roughly a 20% increase. It suggests a much greater ability to handle daily metabolic strain. It's a measure of internal resilience.
This is where the study gets really, really compelling for me. They didn't just stop with blood work and fat scores. They looked at the quality of the feathers themselves.
Ah, yes. Telechronology.
What a fantastic word.
It's an amazing technique. You're basically studying the daily growth bars on a feather. Since feathers grow a little bit each day, the width of that bar tells you how well nourished the bird was on that specific day.
So wider bars mean better nutrition.
Simple as that. And for both 2012 and 2013, the birds with feeders had significantly wider growth bars. It was clear proof they were in better nutritional shape.
But the real test, the thing that really isolates the power of that supplemental food, was the experiment they did.
The feather removal.
Yeah. We know that molting, regrowing feathers is one of the most draining things a bird can do. So forcing them to regrow a feather outside of that normal cycle is a massive stressor.
And the results were just definitive. When they pulled a feather, the birds at the control sites, they really struggled. The new feather that grew back was actually worse. The growth bars were 4.2% smaller than the original.
So the stress of the task was too much for their available resources.
Correct. But the feeder birds,
They had that buffer.
they did. Birds at the feeder sites showed a stunning 9.5% increase in the growth bar length of the new feather.
Wow. So the extra food didn't just prevent a deficit. It let them handle a major stressor and still produce a higher quality, stronger feather than the one they had before.
It's just undeniable proof of the physiological buffer that predictable food provides.
That 9.5% increase says it all. And this wasn't just in feathers. We saw it in their overall body condition index too, right? Their size to mass ratio was higher.
It was. And that improved physical state also meant a better first line of defense. They looked at something called the microbial killing index,
Which is basically,
how quickly and effectively their blood can kill common germs like E. coli or S. aureus, their innate immune defense.
their built-in ability to fight off an infection.
You got it. And just like body condition, that ability was significantly greater for the birds with access to feeders in 2012 and 2013.
So to sum up all the good news, less stress, more fat, better nutrition, stronger feathers, and a faster, more robust immune system. It sounds like an open and shut case. If you want healthy birds, you should feed them.
It really does sound that way, but that is only half the story.
Because all of these incredible physiological gains come with one very, very big trade-off.
And that trade-off is the major negative finding of the study. A significant increase in the probability of a bird showing visible symptoms of infectious disease at the feeder sites.
How bad was it? What kind of diseases are we talking about?
It was pretty severe. The main one, about 81% of cases, was avian pox, which causes these noticeable lesions. But they also saw conjunctivitis, pink eye, and other fungal and bacterial infections.
And at its peak.
At the peak, 8.3% of all the birds they sampled at the feeder sites were showing clear, visible symptoms of disease.
Nearly 1 in 10 birds.
That's
That's a lot. And it really reveals the dark side of this whole thing.
It's the classic ecological cost of density. The very thing that makes the birds healthier, that centralized, predictable food source, is the exact same thing that helps disease spread so effectively.
Because the feeders bring them all to one spot.
They become aggregation points, making it incredibly easy for pathogens to jump from host to host.
And it's not just the crowding, is it? The study mentioned the physical feeders play a role.
They do. The feeders themselves act as what we call fomites.
Fomites.
So a sick bird with, say, avian pox might rub its beak on the feeder, leaving the virus behind. The next bird that lands there, even if it's perfectly healthy, can then pick it up.
So we have this complete paradox. The food makes an individual bird stronger and better able to fight disease.
But it also puts them in an environment where they're much more likely to catch one in the first place.
So what happens when one of these super healthy birds actually gets sick? Does their good condition help?
The study looked at that directly. And yes, getting sick is physiologically costly no matter what. The birds with symptoms had higher stress, worse body condition, lower antioxidant capacity. All of it, compared to their healthy neighbors at the same feeders.
But, and this seems like the key point,
Mm-hmm.
the vast majority of birds at the feeders were still healthy.
Exactly. The majority were asymptomatic. So even with that heightened disease risk, the overall physiological profile of the entire feeder population was still way better than the control population.
So they're better equipped to handle the risk, even though the risk itself is higher.
That's a perfect way to put it. For most of the birds, the benefit of having those robust physiological reserves outweighed the risk of infection.
This research also helps with a worry that a lot of people have, which is dependency.
Yeah.
If you feed birds all winter, are you making them reliant on you? What happens if you stop?
A very common concern. And the researchers tested it. In June of 2013, they just removed all the feeders.
Old turkey.
Cold turkey. And then they waited. They came back 10 months later in April 2014 and resampled all the sites.
And what did they find?
They found that everything, body condition, immune function, stress levels, even the disease prevalence in those formerly fed sites had gone right back to the same levels as the control sites that never had feeders.
No crash. No long-term negative impact.
Not at all. It was powerful evidence that the food was genuinely supplemental. The birds were benefiting from it when it was there, but it didn't cripple their ability to go back to foraging naturally once it was gone.
That is really reassuring. Okay, so the science seems crystal clear. Feeding birds gives them a massive physiological leg up, but it comes with a disease risk that we have to manage.
And that brings us to the practical, actionable takeaway. What do we do with this information?
It has to be hygiene, right?
It all comes down to basic hygiene. The study pointed out a really startling statistic. About 40% of people who feed birds clean their feeders only once a year. Or never.
Never. That's creating a permanent reservoir for pathogens.
It is. So we've proven the feeder is a fomite, a transmission vehicle, and we know that a huge number of people aren't cleaning them.
The solution seems so straightforward then. You just have to clean your feeders regularly.
It is straightforward, but it requires changing behavior. The message needs to be. The incredible benefits of feeding are only really realized if you are also minimizing that disease risk. It's the ethical responsibility that comes with the act.
It's how you maintain that 9.5% fetter growth benefit while trying to keep that 8.3% disease rate as low as possible.
Precisely. The overall conclusion is that birds at feeders are generally healthier, but that health has to be paired with safer, cleaner feeding habits.
This study gives us such a solid foundation, but it also leaves me with a really interesting question. If the problem is the density, the constant aggregation, is there a way to tweak how we feed them?
That's the provocative thought that comes out of all this, isn't it? The study used constant, always full feeders. But what if you change the schedule?
Also,
What if you provisioned a little less food? Or maybe you intentionally left the feeders empty for a day or two between fillings. Could that reduce the density just enough to break the disease transmission cycle?
so the birds would still get the benefit, they'd still lower their stress, build up reserves, but they'd be forced to disperse for a little while, breaking that continuous chain of contact at the feeder.
It's an untested idea, but it's a fascinating one. It points toward finding that perfect balance, the sweet spot between maximizing the physiological good and minimizing the disease risk just by manipulating the feeding schedule.
A really fascinating angle on something so many of us do almost without thinking. The science shows our good intentions have this profound benefit, but only if we're smart about it.
It reminds us that being informed about the risks is every bit as important as the act of putting out the seed in the first place.
So the knowledge is now yours to apply. If you're feeding birds, you are giving them better fat scores and lower stress hormones.
Yep.
But now you also know just how critical it is to keep that feeder clean. Something for you to mull over as you refill your seed supply this week.